Welcome everyone to another edition of our Step Up Your School Smarts webinar series. Today we're talking about participation-related injuries. I'm Kelly Marshall. I will be your host. And we're also joined today by Christy Holm, our internal legal counsel here at RAS. She will have some commentary and support to add later on as we talk about participation-related injuries in your own schools. As we get started, just a couple of items. You have all entered with your phone and computer audio muted. We will, however, take any questions that may come up for you during the webinar. You can use the Q&A feature in your chat, and we'll address those at the end as time allows. So let's get started. We're going to start today by talking about what a participation injury really even means, some of the direct and then indirect costs associated with those participation-related injuries, and then most importantly, talk about some ideas for preventing them from happening in the first place. So why are we talking about this now? Well, it's almost that time, right? Most of us are getting ready to go back to school. And sometimes back to school activities mean some of those activities that are intended to be fun and team building types of activities, but also things that maybe your staff aren't normally used to doing as part of their day-to-day tasks. It's a good time to talk about setting expectations for the school year as well, and to talk to your staff about the dangers of participating in some of those student activities throughout the school year. So what are some of those active participation activities that we're talking about? As I already alluded to, those can be simple things like staff team building activities. Student versus teacher challenges can be popular as well. Things even like pep rallies and field trips, and your everyday instances of things like recess and the games and sports that are being played there as well. These are the things that we're going to talk about avoiding for staff and why that's important. So participating from a staff standpoint with students in all of the activities and others that you see listed here can and has resulted in things from as seemingly minor like concussions to the more significant and serious injuries like torn tendons, pulled muscles, and even fractured and broken bones. So today we'll talk about the reminder that supervision is truly the role and should remain the primary role of staff in these types of situations. So the impact is not, of course, just to the injured worker. Here you see a whole slew of other things that can come as part of an injury that happens when a staff member is injured in a participation-related type of activity. When you experience that sort of an injury, you tend to see some of that increased workload fall on to others when you have someone who isn't able to do maybe their normal classroom or lunchroom types of activities and responsibilities. Additionally, you might have those associated costs if you have to train someone else or to pay their wages to replace the worker who's injured at that time. Can also result in some difficulties and an impact for your students in terms of an interruption in the continuity of their education when they have a teacher or someone else who may not be able to be part of their normal day-to-day activities or in their classroom. That injured worker also then has to deal with that fear of being re-injured and the additional psychosocial impacts that may come as a result of experiencing a work-related accident. In addition, it's important to think about the idea that that employee is also then experiencing an interruption in their ability to perform all of their roles. So not just what they see during the school day as part of their work day, but everything else outside of school and at home too. I would be a little remiss to not have to give you a quick Work Comp 101 here, but we'll talk a little bit about the cost of these injuries as well. So a very high level reminder, participation injuries and how they fall in line with where that impacts your work comp dollars and premium. So as a reminder, work comp rates are set by a national council. It reflects the hazards that are associated with the work done in your place of employment, so in your schools. As an employer, however, you don't have a lot of control over what that base rate is. But what you do have control over is your experience modifier, which is just what it sounds. It's your experience as an insured school. That's something that you do have some control over, and we'll talk about how and why. Your experience modifier is based on your history of claims, so the number of claims you have, how significant and severe they are, and then any lost time wages or expenses. So a quick look at how this plays out here. Experience modification starts at 1.0. That's what we say is kind of that break-even point. You can see on the bottom of the slide here, if we're looking at an employer who has an EMOD of a 1.0 and their base price for work comp premium is $100,000, then that's basically just a straight across even. They're paying $100,000 for their work comp premium. However, if they have managed their work comp claims and they've prevented a significant number of work comp claims, and they've been able to experience a little bit of a break in that EMOD, they may then have that EMOD of a 0.8 in the middle. So they're instead paying only $80,000 for that same insurance premium. On the bottom end of that, however, when you do have a school who still has the base price at $100,000, but has maybe had some difficult injuries, some tough return to work situations, they have an EMOD of a 1.5. Their EMOD then, their premium rather, is $150,000. So let's look at where those participation injuries come in and how this means that you can really manage some of those things. Experience modification is based on a couple of different types of claims, and we'll look at an example of this coming up. Medical only claims are those claims where we don't pay any lost time wages to the injured worker. So the really important part here is that when those are all reported, they receive a discount. They're given a discount of 70%. So only 30% of those total claim costs get included in that EMOD calculation that we just looked at. On the other side of that coin, indemnity claims, or those significant claims where an injured worker experiences lost time, they're not able to come back to work quickly following an injury, we then owe them those lost time wages. Those are reported at 100% of claim costs. So here's an example of how a different claim actually impacted a real school district's workers' compensation costs and subsequent premium. This is a real claim example of a teacher, full-time teacher, worked for the district that she was in for over 20 years. She was on a fun ice skating trip, indoor ice skating rink with her students, and was, of course, ice skating with her students. At that time, she fell backwards, hit her head. She experienced a loss of consciousness and ended up suffering a concussion, a spinal cord injury, and then ultimately required a neck fusion. So as a result, she was off of work, out of school for several months. Her recovery was impacted a bit further with some extended recovery time due to additional symptoms from her head injury. So she experienced some vertigo, dizziness, post-concussive symptoms like nausea and so forth. As a result, once her claim was wrapped up, she was finished with all of her medical treatment. She ended up receiving an impairment rating of 2% for her upper extremity and arm, and then 6% as the whole body. So she had some not only wage loss benefits that were paid, but she also had this impairment rating that she was paid as a result of this work-related injury. In total, for her injury cost just under $100,000. But $28,000 of that total cost was simply from indemnity payments. So her lost wages and then that impairment rating piece as well. As a result, this school district ended up seeing an EMOD increase of what looks to be fairly minor of 0.0474. At that time, their premium was somewhere under around $650,000. As a result, they ended up seeing a total premium increase of nearly $140,000 over the course of the next 3 years. You might remember that work comp insurance looks back 3 years at that previous experience as an insured to help determine what your premium and your EMOD looks like going forward. So here we had not only the claim costs and the lost time associated with this employee's injury and the payments that she received as a result. But over the course of that next 3 years, this particular school district ended up paying nearly $50,000 extra per year in insurance premiums for their workers' compensation insurance as a result strictly of this one injury. So you can start to see how significant this can be when you have one, not just one, but maybe a couple of injuries that can add up pretty quickly when you're looking at those lost time benefits. So the real question here is it necessary? Is this something that's appropriate for your teachers and your staff to be participating in? Think through those return to school, those fun back to school activities and games and challenges, your pep rally physical challenges that we have people out there doing, what's happening at recess and the sports that are being played. But is that truly something that is a requirement of the job? It's easy to think about that as something that staff enjoy participating in. But if you had someone who couldn't do those things, would they still be a good teacher or another staff person? And if so, is that a good reason that you would want to keep them around? I would encourage you to think about that when you're thinking about putting them in those situations where they may then not be able to do the essential functions that they were actually hired to do. Part of how you can think about preventing some of these participation-related injuries is to include your staff when you're making some of these events, when you're planning these events, and ask them that question. Is it necessary for staff to participate in some of these things? And again, as I mentioned, let's think about what their essential job functions are and what they're really there to do on a daily basis. What's important to you that they're able to do for you? And is it playing dodgeball at recess with your students? Another thing that we often see here is physical ability concerns. So is participation truly, again, an essential function of their job? And if they aren't able to do some of these things, and we start to question their ability to do the job, that's where it becomes necessary to think about, is this something that is necessary as part of their day-to-day activities? We'll talk a little bit more about this, but a good place to start is to have a participation-related policy and to follow and then enforce it consistently. I anticipate that we may talk a little bit more about this, and some of you may have questions as well. But especially in the situation of participation being questioned as an essential function of the job, if you have an employee who isn't able to do some of those things, who maybe isn't able to participate in recess activities or some of those team building activities anymore, that's also not a good reason to think about them not being able to do their job. So it's important here when you're considering whether someone is able to perform the essential functions of their job to look at what they're required to do, but then also as you're looking maybe at some changes that might be happening physically with a particular employee, be proactive about what you're doing with them. If you start to see maybe some of that degeneration or change in their abilities, don't wait for them to file a claim or to get injured. Look at what their performance-related problems might be. And if you need to, you can talk about fit for duty testing to make any accommodations or document those if you do need to offer some accommodations. If you do run into those situations where you have a teacher or another staff member who is no longer deemed to be fit for their particular duty of their jobs, then that's when it's important too to think about transitioning those people into some other positions within their physical capacities. If you didn't hire them to be able to play tag and dodgeball, then that's probably not a good reason to try to shift them into another job either. This is the time that you can start to look at some of those other opportunities if and when that truly becomes necessary. If you do have questions about that, and we will talk again about having a policy and so forth, it's always a good idea to seek advice from your own legal counsel as well. So how else can you prevent participation injuries? Well, I mentioned the policy piece. If you don't already have one, that's always a great place to start, is to draft and adopt a policy related to participation and activities like that among your staff. It's never too late to adopt a new best practice procedure or policy, and it's probably the best place for you to start is to have a written policy in place. And then you can begin to educate your staff about that, enforce it, and do that regularly and consistently. Make sure that your staff is aware of not only the policy should you have or put one into place, but also the repercussions of the enforcement of said policy. And most importantly, it's important that you do discourage their physical participation in those types of activities. And oftentimes that means educating them about why that's important, that you value what they do for you in the classroom, for example, as opposed to what they do for you on the playground or in the staff versus student volleyball challenge. Ultimately, you don't want to be putting those precious and sometimes very limited school budget dollars into your workers' compensation premiums. And this is truly one place that it can be very preventable and manageable and give you the opportunity to have some control over where those dollars are going. So before we wrap up, here's your quick checklist in truly being a leader in this space. First, start with looking at what your students' skills are and remind staff that their job is to encourage them, instruct them, and supervise them. They should be working from the sidelines. They should be good coaches and teachers, not participants. Oftentimes, staff can utilize a student or really good communication skills to be able to demonstrate some of those skills instead of trying to do something themselves that maybe they did quite well 20 years ago, but maybe isn't the best idea for them to be doing anymore. Before we take a look at any questions, I wanted to follow up with just a couple of items. You will receive a survey following the webinar. It is literally just a couple of questions, so it shouldn't take you more than a few minutes, but it helps us better understand what's of value to you to see in our future webinar events here at RAS, especially as we plan for what's to come next year. You will also receive a recording of today's webinar in an email follow-up, and all of our webinars are now available on our YouTube channel, so you'll get that link as well. You're more than welcome to share any of those with others who may benefit from this information, including our recent back to school boot camp that has something for every department should you be looking for those kinds of things. We are planning to see you again in September. If you can believe, we'll already be talking about winter weather and how to keep everyone safely sliding into winter. So before I take a look at any questions, I would like to offer just a minute for Christy to talk a little bit about the legal implications or considerations on implementing a policy related to participation related types of activities. So I know, Christy, what everybody wants you to say is, if I have a policy that says don't participate in any kind of these activities, then ultimately, does that mean I can just deny a claim if something like this comes up? And I have a feeling you're going to say it's not that easy.
That's exactly what I'm going to say, Kelly. Thank you for inviting me to participate today. I wish the answers were so clear, but as many of you know, or if you've had any involvement in workers' compensation claims in the past, everything is very fact specific. Everything is very jurisdictional specific. But when it comes to participation injuries, it really boils down to what gives you at least the ability to have defenses, to raise questions, to potentially resolve claims so that they don't become the long, never-ending claims where you're in litigation for years and years. So having a policy in place is the first step. But what goes hand in hand with that is enforcing the policy. And in most jurisdictions, if you have a policy, but your employees don't know about it and nobody pays attention to it and nobody enforces it, or calls them out if they're participating or writes them up if they're participating and they shouldn't, it's not going to end up getting you anywhere. So it is very important that if you are going to have this type of policy in place, you need to make sure you're reminding your employees of it. And if you see them doing something they shouldn't be doing, you need to address it and address it immediately. And that's going to really put you in the best position that while it may not be the end all be all, it will at least give you something to talk about or take to a judge.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I don't see that we have any questions, so that means we must have done a really good job of explaining, and everyone's busy drafting their participation related policies. If you do have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to us, and we will look forward to seeing many of you next month. Thanks, everyone.